project. And also thank you for the introduction. Basically, we've done basically issues and roots for the past 7 years, so we have a lot of projects, but I'm going to zero in on our main projects and also how we got here. Excuse me if this pointer is not working because I was plugging into the other Mac, which is not really working. So maybe Sion can just help me move on to the next slide. So I just thought we'd be good to start with a little quiz before I get on with the talk. And I've put together a few slides of interesting dishes with interesting vegetables. This is done by Chef Darren Teo of Dewakan. Basically, he's based in KDU in Glenmarie, and he uses a lot of different weeds and interesting vegetables for his dishes. Can anyone actually name me the vegetable that's on this dish right now? Wrong. So it's a weed and it's really interesting. And he uses a lot of things that you don't actually normally cultivate. And I found it like really, well, I really love his restaurant. So this, if you go on to the next slide, is actually ketumpang air. And ketumpang air is something that really just grows at the sides of longkangs, and you sure bound to have seen it at some point in your life. So he uses this, and it's something that's so unassuming, but it's actually so tasty, and he uses it in his food, and he charges 350 ringgit per pax at his restaurant just to eat this, and it grows in your longkang. So that's really amazing to me. In the next slide is also another of his dishes. I've drawn like a small line towards it. Can anyone tell me what the vegetable is for this one? So like you, I probably wouldn't have known this 7 years. Really just to say that there's so many things that grow in our backyards and we don't really know about it. I didn't know about it, and my background is actually in graphic design, which is really far away from agriculture or plants. And my experience in the next slide was when I visited my friend's place in Batu Arang, which is actually not very far from the leprosy place in Sungai Buloh. And I discovered her space, and it was just this plot of things growing when I got there, and I didn't know that actually half of it was edible. Couldn't really recognize anything, and it really struck me as something that, how was it that I've lived for so long and not understood the things that were growing around me. So from this, I felt that I was really inspired to actually try to learn more about my environment, because growing up in the city, I felt, I was very disconnected from nature. And from this, in the next slide, this is an example of spaces that we live in KL. I basically live here at the moment. And as you can see, contrasting to the previous slide, it's very jarring, concrete spaces, only palm trees growing. So I decided to take it upon myself to try to learn more about growing vegetables and try to bridge that divide between myself and nature. And in the next slide, it's actually my first growing experiment, which is basically just melon seeds that I ate. I ate the melon, and then the seeds, I chucked it into this Tupperware and see whether it could grow. And it was actually very exciting because didn't grow up with any experience growing anything, right? So from this growing of melon seeds, then I started experimenting in my backyard, or my balcony more like it, growing different things in pots, trying to see what could grow on my balcony and documenting it in this little blog, Tumblr, which is no longer very popular. So then moving on to trying to grow stuff in gutters. So these were gutters that I got from a hardware shop, put it together, hung it over another balcony. And I don't know if anyone can recognize the vegetables that are growing in this gutter, but there was a lot of sweet potato leaves. There's also Suriname spinach and a lot of Vietnamese mint as well. So I was pretty amazed that I could grow so many things from 2 gutters. Now, started visiting a couple of farms elsewhere. So this was actually in Portugal and also in London as well. I was just looking at a few different community farms that were there. And also a pig farm in London, because I was very interested to see how they bred pigs in other countries. Very clean and nice. So then going overseas, checking out all these farm projects in the next slide as well. There are very interesting community projects in London where they had all these garden spaces where people could come, they could pet donkeys and chickens, and they had aquaponic systems and fishes. And that was really, to me, very interesting. I wanted to see if we could actually do it in KL. So we started our first edible garden because we found a space in PJ, which was this house. It's a single-story bungalow, not lived in for 40 years. Not sure why, don't know whether there were any like ghosts living in there, but it was uninhabited, but it was available for rent. So then we started renting this place, and we didn't actually have a budget of how are we going to do this experimental space. We didn't know what were the projections, but we really just wanted to see how far we could go and how much we could experiment with the space. So when we got the house, we planned around it. We wanted to do everything because we were very young, naive, and then we were like, yeah, everything also can grow. So we had planned this out, trying to see as much veggies that we could basically squeeze into this space. And the next video actually shows the process of this. So I'm going to talk over this. It actually is music, but so this is the space, and this is the front yard that we had. And this is the initial part when we got there, and everything that we wanted. And we basically had no budget, right? So we did everything ourselves. We went there and then we jungled every weekend and all that. And this was actually a few years ago now. And we turned it into a bit of a jungle, where we ran a lot of workshops. And how we actually funded this was that we would actually run workshops, bring lecturers in from overseas or wherever, and we would charge people to come for the workshops. So in that sense, it kind of paid for itself. That was how we funded it. This is an example of one of the workshops where we created a pizza oven using the clay that we dug up from the garden as well. And these were other things that sort of popped up along the way. We had different products that we came up with and all that. So if you fast forward the video a bit, I would if I could. These are just, or maybe just before that, in the middle, yeah. Maybe before that? Like before that? Just wanted to show there were a few different veggies that we were growing. And a few examples. But if we can't see it, somewhere in the middle. Okay, never mind, forget about it. So anyhow, you can view this video online, it's on YouTube anyway. But we grew a lot of different things, and I think the last time we counted, we had 20 to 30 different types of things growing in this space, and this was just an example of what we were cooking. But you can forward to the next slide, because this is just us cooking and having fun, and this was the kitchen that we have. And that's the Ulam Raja plant, and that's sort of our dinner table. So if you move on to the next slide, yeah, so I mean, we had this project we had this space actually for about 6 years. And over the 6 years, there was a lot of media coverage, which we were very thankful for. And that's, if you see the picture on the right, that's an example of a few veggie beds that we started there. And also then at the bottom, there are a few seed boxes. So this was just to highlight a few things that was good about the space. I mean, people were very drawn to the project, which we were very blessed. And they started highlighting it in Time Out as well, and a few other media spaces. We got a bit of funding from British Council to push the project forward. So from all of this, right, I mean, we grew in our own space and experimented with it. And the question was, how do we actually get everybody else to then join in on our growing brigade, right? And we kind of, after all these years, we kind of really honed down into 3 things. And we wanted to get everyone involved, because normally for, I guess, landscaping, if you have a budget, then you can afford to pay someone to do it. But what do we do with people who can't actually afford to pay us to build gardens for them? So first off, for those who couldn't afford our services, we would come up with products so that people can actually start growing on their own without having to engage with us in our services. And for those who could afford a bit more, they could actually pay and come for our workshops. And then of course those who have bigger budgets, then they can come and commission us to build gardens for them. So these are a few case studies of what we've done over the years. In the next slide, we started coming up with products or simple publications so that people can actually learn on their own without having to pay so much. In the next slide, these are a few seed boxes that we came up with, that we designed, and we actually stocked them here in Kuching also, because one of the retailers asked if we could bring it there. And we started coming up with different small products. So all this is like priced between 30 to 50 ringgit, really to get people growing without having to spend so much. We have these like sayo shirts. And also, then we have a lot of workshops that we run in our space, and this is geared towards the younger generation of 5 to 8-year-olds. Because we felt that, okay, they were the ones that would need more exposure to nature so that they could bring it forward in their adult lives. So they get to play with chickens and things like that in our garden as well. And these are an example of home gardens that we've done. So this is Cheryl Sama and Ping Ho. This is their space in Bangsa, which we built a garden for. At the back also you can see a ton of Ulang Raja growing as well. But so we built this garden for them and they were really happy with the result, and they continue to harvest from it as well. So a few more case studies just to show you how we actually do it. So I mean, we're a really small team. We started with 2 and now we are 6 to 10. And when we build gardens, we only have 1 car, we don't have a lorry. So it's very easy for us to set up no-dig gardens. So if you go back 2 slides. We set up these no-dig gardens using this grow tong. And it comes in modular pieces so we can transport it in our car, and we build the gardens from scratch. We don't have to do a lot of digging, but all we do is just fill up these container beds, and this is really something that's very easy to implement, and it's what we've been doing for the past few years. So this is Diane and her edible garden in Damansara Heights. Then you can fast forward to the next slide. And also, when we build gardens, documentation is of course very important, and we don't have time to document every garden, so we get people to Instagram their own gardens, upload it so that we can actually keep track of the gardens as well. So these are examples of things that she's done. The educational garden case study is actually our own garden in our new space. So Bukit Gasing was the initial experimental space. Last year we were lucky enough to find this amazing house with amazing piece of land in front and on the right side of it as well. And we started an educational garden in the space because we partnered up with a Montessori where they would actually get the kids to come and do the gardening, and they would be able to play in the space. So if you go to the next few slides, this is the initial space when we came to see. We have like, I think three floors. So then this was initially how we set this up, because the learnings from the Bukit Gasing garden was that we wanted to grow everything, and then we didn't even give priority to access slates and things like that. So for this one, we really wanted it to be a bit more organized, and we set up the same thing, no-dig garden beds, by using fiber cement boards. So they kind of look a bit woodish and not too cold. So that's currently, well, this was maybe taken in July or so. And the kids play in the space, and if you see on the top right corner, there's a chicken pen as well, and we had 4 chickens to start off with. They were kunyit, merah, curry, and kicap. Currently there's only curry and kunyit left, because I think there's like civet cats in the area and cobras somehow. So this is just some pictures from the Montessori, the kids hanging out with the chickens, and they really enjoy it, and having fun with the vegetable beds and composting in the space. So we also then, have an indoor space, and this is kind of like the classroom. And it's always fun to get the kids to do the work, because we don't have to do so much work. So this is a case study of a school garden that we did for Sri KL. It's in Subang. And actually we worked with an architecture firm called Sea Arch. And they called us in to do the planning of the garden, because there was this piece of land that actually had a landslide in the tree collapse, and then they were like, what should we do? And they thought, oh, let's convert it into an edible garden. So we came in and then we zoned the space out. giving priority to the nursery, and also then trying to divide which plants to go where, whether you have your leafy vegetables or your rooting vegetables, fruiting. And in the next slide, this is kind of like the outcome of it. So CH designed the main walkway, and we planned out the plants that were going to be planted them before the students could actually get to it. So for certain projects, sometimes we just have to plant first before we can get the students to plant, so that they actually know or can envision what's going on. And of course, setting up the garden doesn't take too long, because planting in maybe 1 to 2 months. But after that, it's actually a very long-term engagement program with the stakeholders, and this was with the teachers, showing them how to compost within the space as well. So a lot of our work is actually in the programming and not so much the building and the designing, because programming is basically in perpetuity, and you have to do it for a long time. So a few more projects. This is a rooftop garden for Jeff Ramsey, who's a Michelin star chef, and he has a restaurant in Clearwater Building, and he wanted to grow his own Japanese herbs and vegetables. And we thought, yeah, sure, why not, right? So this was our first rooftop garden using the grotongs again, but he had to do it in such a way that it was mobile, because if when they wanted to clean the windows, you have to hook stuff onto the roof or the top floor, so that you can clean the windows and things like that. So this was a garden that we set up, but we tried to grow these Japanese herbs. We grew them in our space in Bukit Gasing. They worked really well, but once we brought them up to the rooftop, of course here, a lot of different microclimates to deal with, so then they didn't thrive so well, and he then started to grow local things instead of trying to grow Japanese stuff. So that's something to keep in mind if you ever want to grow stuff. Don't grow Japanese stuff on your rooftop. So this is another project that we worked with, also close to the Sungai Buloh Leprosy Center, this was in partnership with Gamuda Land, and they have a space called Kundang Estates. And they basically had already planned to have a community garden within their development. So when we do garden builds as well, we always try to engage with the client and get everyone involved. It's not something where we just build and then you just enjoy. No, we have to build this together. So this was the beginning of this garden, where our clients in the second picture came to build the garden together with us, because it was also a training in progress. So it was very desertified in the beginning, because they cut down on trees before they could start their development. Then in the next slide, this was kind of like what it looked like a year, 2 years later. And with this also, we have documented it on Instagram, so it has its own Instagram account. So if you look at instagram.com/Kundang Garden, you can see the garden in progress and how it's grown over the years. So we were there to maintain it for 2 years, and now it's handed back to the community already. So usually signage for us is very important, also community engagement. So this was a CSR project with their staff. So they were harvesting after we had lovingly worked on it for 2 years. So yeah, a lot of different flowers growing, but you can check them out on Instagram. So lastly, this is our biggest project and our most recent one. It's a space in town on Jalan Hang Jebat, just opposite the stadium. And this was in partnership with Think City. It's actually been going on for 3 years. We started off with a survey to see whether there was a space in town that we could start an edible garden at. We found YWCA, and then we started a pilot garden project. We started a small garden, because when we start gardens, we don't want to start them too big in case the community cannot handle. So in the next slide, you can see what we started with. Again, getting everyone involved. This was one of the initial builds. It was very, very muddy that day, raining, pouring really badly. So we started with a very small strip. In the next slide, this was the group of girls that were there. So at YWCA, they have a vocational training opportunity center, which they then house girls from underprivileged backgrounds, those who cannot afford to pay for higher education. They get to come here for a year and learn different skills. So we're working with the culinary and baking school girls where they learn how to bake, cook, and then they also have to garden at the same time, so they know where their food is coming from. So this is the initial garden, the pilot project, in which it thrived for a year. The girls had to manage it. Then now, just in January, this is also the harvesting after it's all been done already. Now in January, in the next slide, we started expanding. So if you look at that grey strip, that was where it started with, but Pink City was very happy with the project, so then they decided to also fund the rest of the space, which is the expansion of the green beds as well as the fruit tree area. So this was the initial plan, where for VTalk, well, now it's not an edible garden anymore, it's an urban farm. So we'll be expanding the garden and then getting different vegetables in. So now the girls actually have to grow and make a bit of money from it. So this is the next level, and it will be an experiment as well, because this is just started and we will have 3 seasons in the year. So in the next slide, this is an example of the work in progress. This was the garden beds. Again, we built it with fiber cement boards because it's just cheaper and easier compared to the stainless steel ones, the steel ones. And also this is the Instagram account which you can look up, of the urban farm, in which it's just ongoing, and every week we'll be updating the Instagram. So I mean, just to take away from it, because we've been around for so long, and when people always ask us whether we can go in and start gardens, and people always ask us, yeah, I've got this huge 2-acre, 5-acre land, can you come and do something? And when we ask them if they have any experience, they were like, no, we have no experience whatsoever. So from our take from this is really, I think, if you want to start a garden, you should really start small, start in your own backyards, and it's not a problem to really, even if it's from a pot, very simple, I think that's the best place to start. Also, yeah, build edible gardens based on the community, not the space, because I feel that gardens are really very much like pets. They're not things that you grow and then they will live forever. You actually have to feed them, nurture them, give them water daily. So that's a misconception that a lot of people have. And sometimes when you're growing things, a lot of people look to Pinterest for inspiration, and they want to grow rosemary and they want to grow like sage. And these things don't actually grow very well in our climate. So Google is actually your best friend. Every time you want to grow something, look it up first, check out the climate before you try growing it, to see whether it's appropriate. And of course, then you should grow what you like to eat, because if you grow something and you don't eat it, then it's just going to either overgrow or die. So it's just really important to grow what you like to eat. So just to end it all, I mean, this is just a little quote, but yeah, what would our city look like if we all started to grow food right on our our doorsteps? And this is something that we try to really push, and this is our inspiration for KL, what we want to see. And we want to see people trying to grow things. They don't have to grow a lot, but if they just start from a small pot, I think that would really make us quite happy, really. So if you have any questions, I think, yeah, you can come and see me later, but that's pretty much the end of my talk. Thank you very much.